Today we're going to talk about the most common position at the amateur and beginner level, and I'll show you clear and understandable ideas and plans for how to win in it. Because your opponents keep making the same mistakes over and over, and you don't even know how to take advantage of them. Let's go. And what I'd like to talk about is the position that arises after the moves e4, e5, nf3, nc6, bc4, bc5, a typical Italian game. Everyone here plays nc3, nf6, d3, and d6. And this is the most common position you'll see if you've recently started playing chess. Because it all makes sense. You're developing your pieces and now you're about to castle. And ask yourself, how would you play as white here? I'm sure your answer is either the move bishop to g5 or h3 or simply castling. And out of these three moves, castling is the most reasonable continuation. But bishop to g5 and h3 are inaccuracies. And now we're going to talk about how to win against this. Looking ahead, I'll say that for white, the strongest move here is bishop to e3. One of the strongest anyway. That's it. You could also play knight to a4 and try to exchange the bishop. That's an interesting continuation. So what's wrong with the pin on g5? And what's wrong with the move h3? So if white plays bishop to g5, under no circumstances should we support them with the move bishop to g4. Let me say, if we look at the Lichess statistics, bishop to g5 is the most popular continuation in this position. 2.5 million games. If we play bishop to g4, white will of course be happy. But here we need to play pawn to h6, asking white what they plan to do next. And here, essentially, they have to take the knight, but in that case, there's nothing to worry about. We simply develop our queen. And for example, if the knight moves forward, we can return to d8 to protect the pawn on c7. And continue developing as if nothing happened. But usually, if white has already brought their bishop out to g5, they retreated to h4. And here, it's important not to be afraid to play pawn to g5. We haven't castled yet, so we're not afraid to push the pawns in front of our king. Because if the pawn had gone to g5 when our king was on g8, you always have to watch out for a knight sacrifice there. In this situation, the knight sacrifice isn't dangerous, so white retreats to g3. And now in this position, we bring our bishop out to g4. So what's the difference? Now, if white tries to play h3, we move our bishop back to h5. Their g-pawn is blocked by their own bishop on g3. The problem is that this bishop has no prospects at all. It's trapped by the pawns and has no squares to go to, no way out. For our part, we want to bring the knight to d4 and put pressure on this pin, which is very difficult for white to deal with. The most popular move here is queen to d2, but after queen d2, we can already capture the knight on ff3, ruin our opponent's pawn structure, and place our knight on d4. This is a position with a very comfortable advantage for black. Then we bring out the queen, castle long, and the position is simply excellent. If white tries to clear the way for the pawn to move to g4, then in this case, well, we can try to bring the knight to a5 and exchange the light-squared bishop. We can't really prevent the move g4 directly. Well, for example, if we continue developing, play queen c7, g4, bishop g6. Yes, now our bishop ends up in a similar situation. If we don't want to allow this, we can try taking on f3 and placing the knight on d4. The position here is roughly equal, but the bishop on h2 is still locked in. But my personal recommendation here after bishop h2, which is the second most popular move, though it's actually quite hard to come up with, is to try playing knight a5 and manage to exchange off this light squared bishop. This is the main problem with the move bishop g5 from white's side. So if you spot this solution, you don't need to immediately repeat by bringing the bishop out to g4. Try to catch your opponent off guard. The second most popular move is h3, which is precisely to prevent the bishop from coming out to g4 and pinning the knight. In that case, we support white's idea and also play h6, not allowing the bishop to go to g5. And the most popular move for white here is to castle. Bishop to e3, as I mentioned before, is a good continuation because after such an exchange, white's pawns, one of them moves closer to the center, and that's a strong pawn formation. That's why in this situation, I recommend retreating the bishop to b6, keeping up the tension and not allowing exchanges on your opponent's turn. But most people here choose to castle. And after castling, we can once again find a strong, unconventional move here to create problems for our opponent. g5 is the fourth most popular move with a 62% win rate. It's incredible. Black just demolishes white here. Our idea is quite simple. Since we haven't castled yet, we want to push the pawn to g4, exchange the h3 pawn for white's pawn chain, and launch an attack on the king side, bringing the knight into the center and the rook along the g-file. The queen also comes out later. The thing is, white doesn't know how to deal with this. The strongest move is knight to h2, but finding it without prior knowledge is practically impossible. The knight retreats to prevent the g4 push, and then we can continue developing with bishop to a6, bring out the queen and castle long. Everything will be absolutely fine for us. But if, for example, white plays bishop to e3, I'll show you how the game might develop. We play pawn to g4, forcing white to exchange here. They take on g4, bishop takes g4, they take on c5, d takes c5, and for instance, if white plays knight to d5 here, the most popular continuation again, we simply play the knight to d4, pinning their knight. On the next move, white's pawns will already be ruined and their king exposed. And basically, we just go ahead and deliver mate. For example, after the moves c3, knight f3, g takes f, bishop h3. Next, our rook joins in on the g8 square. If they play rook to e1, we can simply take the knight and then deliver mate on g2. And honestly, I really don't know what advice to give white here. Their position is just, well, it's just lost. They either lose a huge amount of material or they're about to get mated in just a few moves. So the move bishop g5, the move h3 are extremely problematic decisions from white. If you're playing as white, don't make these moves. If you're playing as black and you see your opponent playing like this, now you know what you need to do. If white castles, for example, we bring the bishop out to g4, they play h3, and we move the bishop to h5. Again, we don't rush to castle ourselves, and the best continuation for white here is the move, the plan e3. As I already told you, this is a very good decision. But in this kind of situation, your opponent might be tempted by the move g4 or by the plan of playing g5. For example, if white now plays g4, then in that case, we already have a very interesting sacrifice on the g4 square, which I told you about. And I mentioned that it's effective if the opponent has castled, while we haven't committed yet. And now we need to address the issue of this pin. Our queen is ready to join in on f6 to apply pressure. The knight is ready to go to d4, and essentially the only correct move is bishop to e3. To which we play queen to f6. Knight to d5, queen to g6, bringing the queen into the attack. And for example, if the opponent plays knight to h4, there's the move queen to h5. But if they get tempted by the fork here, that's basically admitting defeat, because you can't take the rook, otherwise checkmate will follow against the white king. And if, after bishop to h5, the opponent plays bishop to g5, you already know what to do. We simply play h6, bishop to h4, and then g5, because again, the opponent has to retreat the bishop to g3. And we can bring the knight into the attack against this pin, ruin the opponent's pawn structure, and get a fantastic position. We can make any move here. Take on f3. Or first, you can bring the queen to d7, threatening the opponent with taking on f3. And the pawns get ruined. And the bishop on g3 won't be able to go anywhere from here anymore. But the most popular move for white, in this position, knight to d5, essentially loses the game, because we can simply take this knight, drive the bishop away from d5 so it does not attack the b7 pawn, and then bring the queen out to f6, putting pressure on the pin which white can no longer get rid of. For example, c3, we take the knight and then push the outside pawn. We'll just go ahead and soon deliver to our opponent. We'll play h4, g4, bring in the rook, and white will have to fall back. So we've now gone over the three most popular continuations: bishop to g5, h3, and castling. Castling, followed by bringing the bishop out to the g5 square, are among the most common mistakes made by amateurs and beginners, in the most popular scenario that often arises after the opening phase.